Hi, I'm Dianne Hennebert. I'm the Stormwater Program Manager for the City of Anacortes, and I'm here to talk to you about the citizen science outfall monitoring project that we've been working on in collaboration with Friends of Skagit Beaches.
I'm very enthusiastic about stormwater, but I'm also equally enthusiastic about collaboration. I really appreciate hearing different perspectives and different ideas on how to deal with some of the things that we face in the stormwater world. And I've gotten some really great ideas for the stormwater program that have come from connecting with a wider variety of people, outside of just those of us that work on NPDES compliance. So I'm here to talk to you about the Anacortes Citizen Science Outfall Monitoring Program, which just celebrated 2 years of monitoring, and talk to you about the things that went well and some of the lessons that we learned along the way. So a little bit about Anacortes. We're pretty small. Our 2020 census was 17,367 people. So fairly small jurisdiction. Our city limits covers 11.7 square miles, and that includes a 3,000-acre city-owned forest land. We're located on Fidalgo Island, which means our runoff goes to the Salish Sea, mostly to Fidalgo Bay there on the east side, which also contains the Fidalgo Bay Aquatic Reserve, Guimas Channel to the north, and Burroughs Bay on the southwest edge of our city limits. Anacortes has a long industrial history. Seafood harvesting and processing, got set up on the shores of the Guimas Channel in the 1890s and is still going on today. A lot of natural resource refining. Historically, it was wood products. We had lumber mills and paper mills, and now we've got two refineries, oil refineries, out on the peninsula there on the right-hand side of the picture. And a big focus on all things marine, again, being on an island. We've got shipping industry, a lot of boat building and boat maintenance, both commercial and recreational boats, and a really strong tourism industry, both here in Anacortes and then people making use of our marinas and the port. And we are the jumping off points for the San Juan Islands. We have all the ferry traffic coming through here also. So locally, there's a lot of importance to protect our natural resources while also supporting our local economy. Like many small jurisdictions, we have a small stormwater division. I'm the whole thing. And one of the things that I really like about the culture here in Anacortes is it is really collaborative because we're so small. I work across all the divisions to get things done. I'll work with the building inspectors in the planning department talking about erosion control measures for single-family residence construction, or work with the city attorney for code amendments. In order to meet all the requirements of our permit, it really requires working across a lot of disciplines. And that also extends beyond City Hall. As I said, I bring a lot of things to the stormwater program from some of our outside partners as well. Everything from shared education and outreach efforts, information sharing, joint projects like constructing rain gardens. With our other Skagit area NPDES permittees, we have a really amazing education and outreach group that accomplishes a lot more than I could ever do on my own. And this citizen science project that I'm here to talk to you about came actually as an overlap of some of these outside groups. So the Outfall Monitoring Program is actually a program put on by Friends of Skagit Beaches. So Tim Gorky, who's a member of Friends of Skagit Beaches and is the founder of this citizen science program, was going through the Salish Sea Stewards training, which is run by the Skagit Marine Resources Committee. And during one of those sessions, he learned, well, that stormwater is the leading cause of pollution in the Salish Sea. So I got to thinking, well, I live in Anacortes, how much does Anacortes contribute to this problem? Do we know what's coming off our streets and out into the sea? And so he reached out to me with questions about the program and what we do and how we do it, and a proposal to build a program with volunteers that could do water quality monitoring on these outfalls and answer the question with hard data of what is coming off of our island and into the sea. So he and I started out with a lot of talking about what a program could look like and what my level of involvement would be. Because a program where you partner with the city as, you know, a nonprofit is going to look very different than a program that doesn't partner with the city. And so we talked a lot about what this could look like and decided that we both thought that it was worth the time and effort to move forward on this together, and that could be the most effective use of the volunteers' time. So I started out by giving him a list of our outfalls, and he recruited his first couple volunteers, and they went and surveyed all of them, looking for legal access to the outfalls, because some of them, you know, the city has an easement to get to it, but things that the public could access and that they could access safely. And I worked on reporting thresholds for the parameters that they were going to monitor for. You know, at what point do they notify me if they see something? I used the Department of Ecology IDDE manual and the threshold memorandum to put that together. And I'll talk more about that later and what changes I wound up making to those. And talked about how and when to notify me regarding any exceedance of these reporting thresholds and how they wanted to convey just the general data that they were collecting. Tim and the Friends of Skagit Beaches got a grant from the Rose Foundation to launch the program and get it up and running. So that included purchase of a YSI and paying for data storage and someone to do some data analysis on it. And then I allowed them use of the city turbidimeter for turbidity readings. So we kind of laid the foundation for this, and then COVID hit. And so we did a little reworking, and really it was a lot of work on Tim's part, because it was full throttle forward. And so he got all of the volunteers that we needed, and he met them one-on-one to train them individually, because we weren't doing groups. And they started sampling in early fall of 2020. So this isn't our full city limits, but as you can see, we have a lot of outfalls. After they weeded out all the ones that they couldn't safely or legally access, they still had about 55 outfalls that could be monitored. So the volunteers work in pairs, and each pair is responsible for monitoring their outfall at least once a month. Now, some of the outfalls drain really small areas, and they're only going to run during moderate or large rainstorms. Others drain fairly large areas and collect a lot of groundwater, or we have quite a few streams that flow into our storm system. And so those ones run year round, regardless of weather. And, you know, the volunteers visited the same 5 outfalls, so they really got to know them and know when they would be running, when it would be safe in regards to tides to sample. And so it was great, because they really took ownership of each spot and had a good feel for what was going on. So benefits of this program. First and foremost, I have a ton of information about water quality in Anacortes that I could have never had the time to collect on my own. The parameters that they tested for were temperature. They noted both air temperature and then water temperature, dissolved oxygen, conductivity, pH, turbidity, and then they did a visual and odor check of the outfall. And starting this fall, they'll be adding E. coli sampling into the mix. So that'll be really interesting to see what we get. So take all this information, it goes into a database, and then I get a monthly digest of that, and you'll see that on the next slide. Obviously, this helps NPDES compliance in a lot of ways. You know, the biggest ones being education and outreach and stewardship activities. It's really been great for illicit discharge reporting because all of these volunteers also live in town, and now they have a really good feel of what does and does not belong in the storm system. So if they see something, they know to call our hotline, or they can contact me directly, and they know what to look for and what information here at the city we would need to respond. And also the data that they've been collecting has been helpful for our stormwater management action planning. I use that for our basin prioritization, and then we'll be using it as I put together my action plan this fall. They also were able to help with some areas of concern, which I'll get to in a little bit more detail soon, but really it was 3 spots where, because of the time that they took to pay attention and to document, we were able to make really concrete improvements for water quality here in Anacortes, because they know their sites well, so they know when something's a little off. So here's what my monthly reports look like. The woman who manages the database will send me an email, and we'll group them in the body of the email by what parameter exceeded. And then within that email, there's an attachment. It has a spreadsheet, and so it'll have all the historical data points for these outfalls that had an exceedance. So you can see, you know, was this a huge jump from where it normally is, or did it just squeak over the notification? And so that's been really, really helpful to get, because I can get it, I can look at it, and then see which sites maybe I feel like I need to go out and take a look at myself and start monitoring. So as I said, you know, we had 3 locations that really have made a really big difference. One here on the right-hand side, the volunteers noticed a lot of goo and things in that ditch were not looking right. And so they were doing some sampling and keeping an eye on it, and were able to find, you can see an illegal dump site on the other side of all the blackberry where you can't see it from the road. And in the end, there were containers holding, I think it was 122 gallons worth of used oil, some of them obviously leaking. And so we were able to get that cleaned up. There was an industrial site that was just upstream of an outfall, and the volunteer noticed, you know, again, like things aren't right. And so, you know, we talked, and she started monitoring kind of upstream of this industry's discharge point into our MS4, then where they discharged, and then downstream. Was able to show over time what was going on, and that resulted in a referral to the industrial permit program. And they came out, and there was a correction notice. You know, the site had to repair and clean out their storm system and do proper mapping of it and upgrade their system. And so that was a long-term situation where moving forward shouldn't be a problem anymore. And then also there was a large construction site right on the shores of our aquatic reserve. And because the citizens were out there, they were able to notice some high turbidity coming off the site, and the city and ecology were able to address it. So not only do I have a lot of really useful data, there's also concrete steps that we've been able to take to improve water quality. So this is a slide I'm sure that you've all been waiting for. If I were sitting in on this, I'd want to know what went wrong, what was difficult, you know, what are the things to worry about? And the biggest piece are those first 2. It was managing expectation and providing context for the results. And this is really an upfront issue. And in retrospect, I can see things that I could have and should have done that would have helped smooth those first months. Definitely more training on the parameters and what influences them, both things that will naturally cause a change and things that could be illicit discharges. and really emphasize that, you know, you've got your baseline reading of what you get when the storm system's running round the clock, but then when you get these heavy rainstorms, that you should expect to see a spike in a lot of these parameters. And what I got was a lot of citizens being like, oh my gosh, there's something going on. And it was like, well, no, actually we just had really hard rainstorm that washed a lot more off the streets than would have otherwise. And also that an exceedance of the reporting thresholds is not confirmation that there's an illicit discharge or that there is a problem going on. I'd set my reporting thresholds fairly low because if something's going on, I want to know and I want to make sure it gets caught. And that was easy for me to do coming with the stormwater background, but a lot of the volunteers didn't have science backgrounds. And so to them, it's just like, we've exceeded, there's a problem. And a lot of this was work up front. And as they got to know their sites and learned a lot more through the process of doing this sampling, talking with Tim, talking with me, we really were able to move past that. I think the perfect example for that is water temperature. Originally, I looked at, you know, the IDDE manual, and they said if water temperature exceeds air temperature, potentially there could be an illicit discharge. So I put that in without thinking about it, I guess, as much as I should have. What I should have really emphasized is that if it's a degree or two higher than the air temperature, there's probably not an illicit discharge going on. That what we're really looking for are, you know, significant differences between water temperature and air temperature. But then you need a definition of what is a significant difference. In the end, well, actually, no, in the beginning, I wound up saying, okay, if the water temperature is 3 degrees Celsius or more above the air temperature, just make note of it. Probably nothing, but just make note of it. And I don't know if anyone noticed, but on that slide with the monthly digest, there was like one exceedance for turbidity, one exceedance for conductivity, and all the rest were temperature. And they were all right around 3 degrees Celsius higher. Where we really ran into a lot of exceedances was wintertime, and that's because the average temperature of groundwater here is 11 degrees Celsius. And anytime the air temperature was 8 degrees Celsius or below, most or a lot of them would then exceed that 3 degrees Celsius reporting threshold. So now I think for the next season, I'll say if it's above 11 degrees Celsius and it's 3 degrees Celsius above the ambient air temperature, then we'll mark it. Or I've seen other places where they just said, if it's 20 degrees Celsius or higher, we want to know about it. Otherwise, we're not concerned. Another thing that would have been helpful to convey to them more strongly is kind of the difference between the base flow in our storm system that comes from the streams that feed into our storm system and the groundwater that enters our storm system, and how that changes when we get heavy rainstorms and get a lot of stormwater that's coming via our catch basins, and how that changes things. Also, how groundwater can affect things. We have one site where we've got a wetlands where the outlet winds up going into our storm system, and the wetland has a lot of tannins. So the water, it's very clear, it's got low turbidity, but it's brown in color, but it's not a source of pollution. It's a naturally occurring instance. And I think the one that I explained but had to explain several times is that stormwater is not fresh water. You know, sometimes they look at information other places and be like, well, this is a water quality violation. Like, well, no, because that's a freshwater standard, and this is stormwater. We're not trying to raise salmon in our storm system. Like, these are water quality standards, but this is what we need to look for stormwater. And that an exceedance of these reporting thresholds is also not a water quality violation. It's just an opportunity to say, hey, let's keep an eye on this. If it's a huge exceedance, obviously we'll head out right away. But a lot of this was upfront work. It was the first, 2 months of winter where they were out a lot. We're both learning as we go what information I need to give to them, what they need to give to me. And as they got a better feel for it, a lot of this kind of passed by the wayside. There was a lot to do about kind of jurisdictional boundaries, what falls under the city, what falls under the Department of Ecology. In our case, what falls under Department of Natural Resources, Aquatic Lands, because that's who has jurisdictions over everything beyond the shoreline. And then public and private MS4 systems. I am responsible for the city system, and I have, a level of jurisdiction over these private systems because they feed into mine, but there's a line there. And I know that it was frustrating sometimes for the volunteers when they would see something that they perceived as a problem and they wanted it to be taken care of immediately because, if you see a problem at home, you can just take care of it and it's done and over with. But that's not how it works with permitting and compliance, that we have to go in and do an inspection and issue a notice of violation and give them a timeline to clean things up. And I think that was really frustrating for some of the volunteers because they'd be like, but the problem is ongoing. A good example being that industrial facility that wound up having to go in and clean out their system and do upgrades was, well, we see this happening. Can't you just shut them down? And well, no, there's a process. And I know that it was frustrating for them. What helped with this was Tim and I had a lot of talks about this at the beginning, and he made it very clear to the volunteers from the start that this group was going to follow city processes. And if what they were looking for was like a gotcha or something to take to the press, that this was not the program for them, that they were here to get information, share it with the city, and allow us to work through our processes. So if I were to go back to the very beginning, I think I would have developed a training with a lot more background about the parameters and the causes for things that could, create an exceedance of the reporting threshold. And I would have given them a lengthy training on municipal enforcement processes and what it looks like, so they'd have a more realistic expectation for timelines for dealing with some of these situations. And then there's the unexpected. Another really valuable thing that has come for me out of this, and a lot of jurisdictions maybe don't deal with this because they don't deal with the tides, but I was unaware of just how far marine water travels up our storm system at high tide. It's not a great picture, but the picture on the right that's looking down into one of our manholes, and those are barnacles that are flourishing inside our MS4. We really stumbled upon it. Volunteers would go out only at low tides. They could access the outfalls, and we were getting conductivity readings that were really high. I mean, 12,000, 14,000, whereas, the ecology recommended reporting, threshold for an IDDE investigation was 500. So really, really high. What it was is that the marine water travels so far up our system, it fills up the sumps in the manholes and the catch basins and just causes conductivity to skyrocket. But it also means that the water that's coming out is not necessarily representative of stormwater because it's also got a lot of marine water mixed in with it. This is useful information to have on many different levels, the biggest of which is long-term planning here at the city. Sea levels aren't going down. And so we really need to start thinking for our upcoming comp plan update and our long-term stormwater planning, how are we going to address this marine water in our storm system, and also what is it doing to our storm system. And so I think that's something that now is brought to our attention a good 5-10 years before it might have otherwise, so we can address it up front. Accuracy of GPS, you know, I gave them a map of our outfalls and then the GPS coordinates, and this is just a side small thing, but it was interesting to see, depending on the unit used, whether it's a cell phone or a GPS unit, how much things varied. And then the parameter variability, which I've touched on a fair amount already, which is, you know, what is an actual spot to start doing an investigation for something like temperature or turbidity. And I wound up really going back to the threshold memorandum and looking a lot closer at the ranges that they gave as part of their literature review, and looking more closely at other jurisdictions that publish these kind of things. What did they set and why? And I'd never really thought to look at what's the average temperature of groundwater in this part of Western Washington. It's really hard to give a hard and fast number for reporting when conditions vary throughout the seasons and the weather patterns. So there were a lot of things that caught me by surprise, but I think will be really useful to know and think about moving forward. So we're 2 years in. It's the end of the grant cycle with the Rose Foundation, and Friends of Skagit Beaches is looking at where do we go from here? And these are kind of the three options they're looking at. Option A, continue as we have been, which is highly unlikely that that's the route that they're going to go. There are a lot of outfalls that never had a single exceedance, and they really have been looking at, is this a good use of our volunteers' time to keep going back to these outfalls that never exhibit any problems? What we're more interested in doing is taking, you know, the 10 outfalls that most commonly have an exceedance and getting more information. There's option B, which is fewer outfalls, more frequent monitoring, looking at having kind of two groups. One group that does the baseline monitoring. They go out monthly, except for July and August. They take the summer off, not a whole lot of rain, and get those kind of baseline measurements. And then a second group of volunteers that chase the storms. And when we get the storms, go out kind of at the peak of the storm and get samples then, so we can compare the difference between, you know, what we're getting out on a regular basis and then what's happening during these big storms. And then option C, still continuing to narrow down to the outfalls that we have the most questions about, but instead of only monitoring the outfall, looking for spots upstream where they can sample, you know, like in a ditch. The volunteers never lift manholes. If there's some reason we need to sample, I will go out and lift the manhole lid for them and help them get a sample. But start, you know, going up the storm system to see if we're seeing some of these things come from a certain part of the storm system, and it can be something that we can address. So it's been a really interesting process. I really appreciate all the hard work that Tim has put in, all the hard work that the volunteers have put in, and their willingness to learn not just about water quality and monitoring, but also about government processes and why we do things the way we do, and how we interact with the businesses in town, how we interact with the Department of Ecology. I feel really good about what we've done, and I'm really proud of it. And so that brings me to the end of my official presentation. And you can always contact me later. I've got my email address and my phone number there if there's something you want to ask offline.